Hello, everyone. This is Miss Murphy here to talk to you about our new module that we're going to be working on during quarter two, which is plot, conflict, and evidence and paraphrasing. Today, we're going to be reviewing just one of those elements, but just so you're aware, our learning targets for this quarter, so that you understand what we're going to be working on, are going to be I can identify and label the sequence of events in a story. I can select evidence that is relevant and clear and connects to my claim. And I can take a quote and put it in my own words. So these are the three skills that we're going to be focusing on next. So today we're going to be looking specifically at plot. So again, reviewing that learning target, I can identify and label the sequence of events in a story. So plot is the sequence of events that make up a story. Usually in a story, one event will trigger the next event and then so on and so on. So it's like kind of like a domino effect. Once one thing happens, then the next thing happens, then the next thing happens. So when you describe a story or an event to someone else, you're summarizing its plot. So anytime someone asks you, what was that movie about? You're giving the plot. And usually when we describe plot, we're talking about a plot diagram. And I know some of you are familiar with this. Some of you might have seen this in some of your other classes before coming to ninth grade. But a plot diagram is when we map out the plot of a story. And we usually discuss plot with these 6 main elements on the plot. It's exposition, conflict, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. So the plot on the plot diagram, the first event is exposition. This is where the basic situation is outlined and the characters and the setting and the main conflict are introduced. This is like the beginning of the story where like everything is laid out, and no good story can be set up without some sort of kind of like background information on who's involved, where is the story taking place, and what's the big problem. Next comes rising action. So rising action is the part of the story where most of the action takes place. This is actually where you're going to see most of the events in the story. The reader begins to see the conflict develop because there's lots of little bits and pieces that are revealed over the story that kind of feed into what is the problem that the reader is going to find out about. And usually there's events that build interest and suspense. So just so you're aware, rising action is usually not just one event. It takes place throughout an entire story. So there might be a lot of different things that happen in rising action before you hit the next piece of the plot. And the next thing that we need to discuss is conflict. Conflict is part of the rising action. It is the struggle of any two opposing forces. And again, usually it's a problem of some kind. Sometimes it can be between a character and some issue that they're facing. Sometimes it can be between two different characters. And there are 2 types of conflict that we're going to focus on. One is internal conflict and one is external conflict. Internal conflict is the stuff that happens inside your head, like decision making, your feelings about things. So a character having to decide or make a choice between 2 difficult like decisions is internal conflict. External conflict is when something happens to a character. It's outside their control. There's nothing they can do about it. It just sort of happens to them. As the story progresses, as you get to the end of the story, you're going to hit something called the climax. And the climax is usually the turning point of the story. It's the moment where the rising action has built up, and it's the most intense or emotional part of the story. The main character will often change in some sort of way, or the focus switches from the problem to the solution. And oftentimes you're going to see your character, your main character, have to finally face whatever that problem is. Sometimes it's solved, sometimes it's not. But the idea is that this is the most intense point in the story and usually comes sort of towards the end. Falling action is usually like the little bits and pieces that result from the climax, and it's the loose ends of the plot that are being tied up. Usually the problem's been solved, but now you're kind of starting to get like, okay, this happened to this character. Okay, now we know what's going to happen at this point in the story. And usually the conflict and the climax are going through the process of being resolved. This part of the story is usually shorter because it's at the very tail end. And then finally, you have the resolution. At the resolution, the story comes to a conclusion. Usually the conflict is resolved. Usually there's some sort of determination that, maybe it's unsolvable. Maybe this is where like a cliffhanger might come in. Or, like I said, the story just ends and then you either get a satisfying ending or you don't. Thanks, guys.